The UN Declaration gives effect to the indivisibility of human rights. Importantly, the first and second articles set out the equal rights of Indigenous individuals and peoples to enjoy human rights and live free from discrimination. Article 21 specifically speaks to the need for special measures to ensure socio-economic improvements to the lives of Indigenous elders, women, youth, children, and persons with disabilities. Article 22, subsection 1, does the same in relation to the rights and needs of these groups in implementing the Declaration overall. Article 22, subsection 2, speaks to protecting Indigenous women and children from all forms of violence and discrimination. Article 44 calls for gender equality between male and female individuals. These words, male and female, are reflective of an instrument that began its development in the 1980s, long before the global community recognized violence against Indigenous women and girls as a human rights issue, and certainly long before gender equality across all genders and gender identities was recognized as such. Article 43 sets out that the UN Declaration constitutes the minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples. It is clear the intent is to extend protections to all vulnerable Indigenous individuals, including those from the 2SL LGBTQI+ community. This panel provides an opportunity to hear the perspectives from Métis Nation elders, women, youth, persons with disabilities, and members of the 2SL LGBTQI+ community in relation to their experiences and their human rights.
Hello everyone, my name is President Clara Morin-Delcall, Métis Nation, British Columbia. I'd like to welcome you all to this discussion on the UN Declaration. Well, passing this legislation, first of all, there will be greater awareness by all public governments and Canadians on the human rights of Indigenous people and set certain minimum standards that must be met by all governments through legislation and policy. Last November here in British Columbia, our provincial government, with the support of all political parties, implemented the declaration, and unfortunately, in that development process, we were not reached until the 11th hour for our input. So I'm pleased that the federal government is including ourselves and all Indigenous groups to be developing this federal implementation. This declaration has to apply both to the individual and collective rights, cultural rights and identity, rights of education, health, language, employment, and that so all Métis people and communities wherever they live in our homeland can benefit by those same rights. Well, free and prior informed consent is hugely important to our Métis people. It is one of the most misunderstood provisions of the Declaration. I see this as a key provision that assures us that Métis people, and our women included, will be engaged and consulted on all decisions that affect us. That level of engagement has seldom happened for our Métis people, and that is wrong. I do not see this as a provision, as a veto, but rather as a requirement that we need to be consulted before certain decisions are made by governments that could impact our people. I think a national action plan should cover rights related to equality and non-discrimination, especially for our women. But here in British Columbia, our rights to be consulted on lands and resources, including the rights to harvest wildlife, are also important and need to be discussed and addressed. I'd like to see our own Métis government apply the UN Declaration, in the first steps being raising awareness with the UN Declaration with our people and ensuring that Métis people are able to fully exercise their rights. I also need to sit down with my cabinet to discuss the application and the UN Declaration and gain their input. I believe we have a role both within our own jurisdiction and also with the Métis National Council. I have always believed in working collaboratively with others in implementing such initiatives because the collaboration results in an exchange of information and ideas and helps to ensure that we are doing the best job possible for our Métis Nation across our homeland. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being on the call today to give your input and give your ideas to this very important topic of the UN Declaration.
My name is Gary Tinker. I'm from Pine House Lake, Saskatchewan. I was born with a disability, but I'm always a positive man, and I do whatever it takes to bring the services into the north for people with disabilities. When I was 20 years old, I had to do something for the people with disabilities in general in Canada, plus Saskatchewan, my province. Nothing was done at that time when I was born with a disability. Nobody was pushing the issue in the forefront. So that's why I did what I'd done, is I wanted to fight for my people. I wanted to fight for the Aboriginal people. I wanted to fight for the Métis people. I wanted to fight, the right people to say, look, we need these services. We need these things. The reason why I did behind it, because there was no services for me when I came back home. And I'm always going to fight for people with disabilities. And at the same time, speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. And that's what I do. I speak for those that cannot speak for themselves. I'm just learning about the declaration. I'm just learning about it, and I'm educating myself to learn it more, to understand about the rights of people with Aboriginal descent and Métis descent as well. So I'm just learning about this declaration about disabilities in Canada. Oh, thank you for this opportunity. I really feel wonderful to be part of this panel. Be safe out there, everyone. I know it's a tough year ahead of us, but be safe and be safe to all families in Canada.
Tanshe, Albert Beck, Dijnakazwin, Ottawa, Neweekin. Hi, my name is Albert Beck. I'm from Ottawa, Ontario, and I'm a senior policy analyst at the Métis National Council, and I'm really happy to be here today. The UN Declaration to me is something that I believe the Two-Spirit community has been asking for many, many, many years. The Declaration sets forth a path that enables our community to move forward in a manner that honors who we are within the Métis Nation. So as an individual within my family, I think the decisions and the legislation and the declaration that's put forth, I'd like it to see it ensure that my human rights as a Métis citizen, as a two-spirited Métis citizen, is upheld and it is honored. And so I think those would be my expectations. Any policy decision that's being made must have the input and participation of the Métis Nation. And for two-spirited people, I think when we're talking about things that are being done on our behalf, specifically within the federal government and even in our own governments, I think it's important that we are involved in those discussions. And so I think they need to include the voices of those that are being impacted by whatever decisions are being made. I would fully support an accountability mechanism that keeps a watchful eye on the proposed legislation to ensure that the legislation lives up to the needs of the Métis Nation. This mechanism would be co-developed and implemented by the Métis Nation within its governance structures and report back to its General Assembly. So there are a number of key priorities that the Métis Nation has identified in the 2017 Canada Métis Nation Accord. And I think we can build on these through our government processes that ensure that our rights, dignity, and survival flourishes and thrives. The Métis Nation will need to decide how its own government will apply the UN Declaration, again, through a process that engages our citizens. The Métis Nation must lead in the implementation and monitoring of the legislation to ensure it meets the needs of our nation. Marcy, thank you. Peacock Michaud. Take care.
Hello, my name is Genevieve Benoit. I am a recent law graduate from the University of Manitoba. I live in Winnipeg, which is the heart of the homeland of the Métis Nation. I am here on this panel today as the youth representative, so I will be coming at this discussion from that perspective. To me, the UN Declaration means it is the minimum standard of how countries should be treating Indigenous people, and this is non-negotiable in my view. I would like to see lawmakers take these minimum standards and actually use them in practice, and use the Declaration as a guide to help bring forward new laws and in the guidance of those already in action. In terms of its application, I would like to see its purpose carried out, which is for Canada and its many institutions, including federal and provincial governments, to respect Indigenous peoples and their representatives, leadership, and institutions. For my own Manitoba Métis community, I would hope that an outcome would be both federal and provincial governments working with the Manitoba Métis Federation in a nation-to-nation and government-to-government approach, and that they would respect governance, inherent rights, and the MMF as a whole. In my view, free, prior, and informed consent is about Indigenous nations and governments and corporations working together in order to come up with appropriate solutions depending on the circumstances. It's not a veto, but it does require actual meaningful discussions and collaboration to take place. In my view, this would mean that when the government, either provincial or federal or a corporation, makes a decision to develop resources, that it engage with the respective provincial Métis governments. For instance, the MMF has Resolution 8, which was passed at their AGA, which requires governments and corporations to consult with the Manitoba Métis community through the MMF. I think, of course, there has to be some sort of a human rights review and compliance mechanism in order to keep everyone accountable. In my view, this would have to have input from the Métis governments, and it would be wise to have appropriate representation of the Métis on any review body as it's developed. I do believe that it's absolutely essential that Canada fully engage with the MMF in developing this plan and the other Métis governments. Any national action plan absolutely requires proper consultation with all Indigenous people and certainly with the Métis. So I would like to see my own Métis government apply the UN Declaration by holding Canada and Manitoba specifically accountable to apply it. It could look like the MMF working with governments in order to ensure it's being applied appropriately, and just to really hold other governments accountable. Thank you so much for having me on this panel today. I hope that the rest of this consultation goes well for everybody.
Tansia, I'm Senator Nora Elder Cummings, and I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. The UN Declaration means for me as a senior that we as Michif people should be recognized, and we should make sure that people understand, we as Michif people, Métis people, that we have our own identity, we have our own culture, and we are a nation of people. When I was growing up, I always heard the word old people, le vieux, quoi le vieil. And that meant that has more respect meaning to me for them. And I think that when we look at that and we say to our people, we always say elders, because elders terminology is everybody. It doesn't have to be a Métis. So for me, when I talk, I always say the old people. And that's important because when I grew up with all old people. And that's where my teachings came from. That's where I had to learn our culture, the understanding of how. And we had so many good teachings. People don't understand that it wasn't just teaching culture. It wasn't just teaching us to cook and stuff like this. It was also teaching us how to garden. They also taught us how to look after the land and all of these things. But, you know, I think it's time that people have to start recognizing us as a nation of people. We, as I said, we had land. we have a culture, we have our language. So we are a nation of people. I want to just say that our leadership, and I say to them that when you take this forth, always remember you're not only speaking on behalf of yourselves, you're talking on behalf of all of your people, all Métis people, whether you're old, young, our children, especially our children. You are speaking on our behalf. We want you to present yourselves in a good way, and we want you to also, when you sit down before you go, that you talk with people, take that direction, and you won't go wrong. And I know they'll do a good job. Thank you.